Hello, welcome to the Address of Fear. If you love horror stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. If you're ready, let's get started. In the reflecting heat of New Mexico, in the midst of the desolate desert, there existed a world where everything was acceptable. As the sun's scorching rays burned the earth, not a single movement hinted at life. The desert had transformed into a cold silence, slowly consuming the soul. Eyes could sense that everything, from the yellowed grasses to the distant vanishing horizon, was far more terrifying than it appeared. This endless void reminded one of their loneliness, insecurity, and the approach of something dark. On the roadside, a young woman walked, occasionally pulling her legs together. She wore a dirty, dusty dress. Her hair was messy, but her eyes were focused on every car approaching from the distance. She shoved her hands into her pockets, desperately trying to signal for help. With every passing vehicle, a light of hope flickered within her, only to be extinguished moments later. Silence was broken only by the sound of engines, yet most vehicles passed by without even a glance. After a while, impatience slowly turned into despair. The heat of the air was nearly making her faint, but she wasn't about to give up. If a car stopped, maybe she could escape this barren land. And at that moment she saw a car speeding toward her. The woman squinted as she examined the approaching vehicle. It was a truck, old and worn out, but she still hoped it would stop. As the engine's sound grew louder, her excitement surged. The truck slowed, and in the seconds before it stopped, the woman's heart skipped a beat. Inside the truck, there was an old man with his hair falling out. His tall frame, broad shoulders, and deeply wrinkled face made him look old and tired. But in his eyes, there was something the woman hadn't noticed. Coldness. At that moment, all the warning signals in the woman's mind were ignored. The man's face bore an innocent smile, trying to convey a sense of trust. The woman approached the truck, waved at the driver, and said, "Will you give me a ride?" The man paused for a moment, looking into her eyes, then remained silent. After a beat, he tilted his head and opened the truck door. "The ride's long," he said, "but I'll take you wherever you need to go." The woman, noticing no fear in his voice, signaled for him to proceed and slowly stepped inside. Once inside, there was an empty seat. As Ray turned the key, the truck's engine roared to life, and hot air started seeping into the vehicle. The woman closed her eyes, relieved. For a brief moment, the journey seemed to bring her peace, but with each passing mile, the sense of peace began to fade. The man watched her every move, deepening the sense of unease she couldn't shake. The truck accelerated along the road. As it traveled, it veered toward what appeared to be an abandoned settlement. The woman followed the landscape with her eyes when, for a brief moment, she noticed a house that seemed to disappear into the desert. For an instant, a strange feeling washed over her, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. In her mind, something felt wrong, but she couldn't grasp it. Survival instincts kicked in, and she pushed the thought aside, focusing on what the road ahead might bring. Fear, however, prevented her from thinking clearly. The house appeared large, old, and abandoned. But when they entered, the woman's fear escalated. There was a coldness in every corner of the house, in every room. As Ray shut the truck door, the woman took a deep breath. That breath was a premonition. Her end was near. Inside the house, nothing was ordinary. A dark corridor stretched ahead, giving the impression that everything had been meticulously placed. The woman silently followed the steps, but when Ray turned to her and said, "Come in, make yourself comfortable," a deep fear took root in her heart. As she entered, she felt that nothing there was hers. Nothing was normal. At that moment, she realized everything had a different purpose, and unfortunately, her life was about to become part of that purpose. Everything in Ray's house was orderly, but it was a kind of order where everything was hidden, every trace covered. Realizing that everything was arranged for torture made the woman's mind spin. Slowly, as she was dragged from one room to another, the fear mounted. Chains, wires connected to old machines, metal instruments glowing in the dark. Each piece caused her heart to race faster. And then, another door slammed shut. There was no way out. Inside that house, only a few steps remained before the end. With one last hope, the woman tried to quickly glance at the door, but it was too late. Ray was approaching her step by step, silently executing his dark plan. The only thing she needed to know now was that no matter how scared she was, at that moment, everything in that house was a fear game, tested by death. As the door slammed shut behind her, it felt as though all the sounds in the world suddenly disappeared. There was only the cold, dense air, and for a moment, an eerie silence of death. The woman began to look around, feeling every emotion within her: fear, hopelessness, and helplessness, all at once. Her eyes darted across the dark corners of the house, scanning everything quickly. But everything seemed to be in place. Everything looked orderly, silent, and calm. Yet in that order, there was a deep void. That emptiness whispered not only that something was missing, but also that something dangerously excessive was present. Ray, closing the door behind him, took a step toward the woman, seemingly unaware of her inner unease. Slowly, he seated her, in the middle of a room on a chair. The woman curled up her knees and wrapped her arms around them, trying to protect herself somehow. Ray's gaze never allowed her to move a step away. As the woman squinted at him, she noticed the coldness in his eyes. His smile, with each passing second, seemed to grow sharper, like part of a trap. "You'll be safe here," Ray said slowly, with a deep voice. In that moment, the woman's heart seemed to stop. Those words didn't offer reassurance. On the contrary, they were a harbinger that everything would soon turn into a trap. There was no sincerity in Ray's voice. He was simply playing a game, and the woman was fully aware of it. But now she didn't know what to do. Clinging tightly to the chair, the woman tried to bury her fear within herself. But her body, her mind, and her soul suddenly awakened on a different level. She realized that everything was broken. Something was approaching within the house. Something unseen, but getting closer with every passing second. The woman could feel her fear growing. She took a deep breath, trying to momentarily cut through the terror choking her throat. But it didn't work. At that moment, she thought everything had strangely disappeared. It was so chaotic in her mind that it was difficult to even understand what was happening. Suddenly, her eyes drifted to the door behind her. That door seemed to be the only passageway to the depths of the house. The old carpet on the wall, the worn-out floorboards, the broken windows, everything seemed like a mess. But when she looked closely, that door opened to another world. When the woman noticed the door, all of her disappointments and fears suddenly ceased. In that moment, with the alarm ringing in her mind, she realized there was something beyond the door. There was no escape. The door slowly closed behind Ray, and locked. And at that moment, a sound echoed from the depths of the house. A deep, chilling sound, not like the hum of the wind, but something darker and colder. The woman trembled with fear, trying to understand the source of the sound. For a moment, she felt as if her whole world had gone dark. That sound was the beginning of the end of everything. Slowly, she looked at Ray and realized the danger approaching her through the depths of his eyes. Ray, holding the woman's hands, suddenly began to tie them quickly. The woman tried to defend herself, but she couldn't move. The chains wrapped around her hands were cold and tight. In that instant, a wave of terror gripped her throat, preventing her from seeing everything coming. The weight of those chains felt like judgment. It was as if she had truly been caught. Ray's every move with his hands was a sign that things would get worse for the woman. Her eyes widened with fear as Ray looked at her coldly. "The quieter you are, the easier it will be," he said. But those words only intensified the woman's terror. It was as if he was treating her like a toy, watching every movement carefully. The woman was forced to face Ray's cold gaze. If she couldn't overcome it, she might never escape. The woman tried to think quickly, but everything was so blurry that she couldn't even understand what to do. Her mind was focused only on one thing: escape. But there was nowhere to run. Every corner of the house felt like a trap closing in on her. That old house seemed like it had been prepared to catch her. After tying the woman's hands, Ray took a deep breath, and gently pushed her shoulders. The woman, trembling, tried to stand up, but with every movement she was pulled deeper into the trap. Ray's eyes watched her, like a hunter, with those calm but dangerous looks. The woman felt that she was in a world that was shrinking with every second. The deep darkness prevented her from moving any further, causing everything to collapse on top of her. In every corner there was a mystery, a threat, a lost hope. With each step Ray took, the silence of approaching death resonated sharply for the woman. Under Ray's cold gaze, which never left her, the woman tried to stop the fear within her for a moment, but she failed. Finally, Ray approached her, a cold smile on his face, and said, "This is your new home." At that moment, the woman's world completely collapsed. The sounds in the dark corners of the house echoed deeply and terrifyingly, signaling the moment when everything for the woman would end. This was only the beginning. She would understand just how horrifying it would be later. The silence in the house was broken by the woman's heartbeat. With each beat, she was drawn closer to a collapse, a step further into the darkness. Under Ray's cold gaze, she was placed on a portable, metal table. The weight of the chains around her hands grew, wrapping around her throat like an ever-deepening terror. Her body trembled, but there was nowhere to run. Ray's hands, with the cold precision of a hunter, hovered over her, surrounding her with a grim security. There were so many details in the walls of the house, so many things that her eyes would eventually lose track of. Not just her eyes, but her soul was slowly disappearing in this dark world. Old tools, strange machines, metal pieces. These weren't just ordinary objects. Each one was there to leave deep marks on her body. Everything had just one purpose: to shape fear and make pain feel like an art. The woman trembled with every piece of equipment, every metal part, while trying to resist the thoughts of terror that echoed ceaselessly in her mind. In that moment, she realized everything was a trap. But being caught in a trap meant that death was one step closer. She was trapped between the heat of the air, the coldness of the metals that touched her body, and the tightening pressure of the chains around her, each movement intensifying her fear. Ray, looking into her eyes, took another step closer. Those eyes penetrated her soul, each second intensifying the pain. "You deserve this," he said, with a mocking tone in his voice. Each word shattered her heart further. No matter how hard she tried to resist, every thought that darkened her mind turned into a spiral of terror. Ray suddenly leaned over her and pulled the chains roughly. The screech of the metal echoed in her ears. "Now we'll truly get to know you," Ray said, stepping back. The fear that never left her eyes only strengthened the dark passion within Ray. He could feel her fear, each moment, each pain, carefully etched into his consciousness. Every corner of the house was equipped with danger signals, but here, everything was set up for the woman. Ray ruled not only her body, but her soul as well. The first torture was designed to awaken her deepest fears. Slowly, Ray inserted a metal hook into her body. When she first felt the pain, tears streamed down her face. But the pain was just beginning. With each movement of the hook, it turned into a pain that made her muscles tighten. Both fear and physical pain echoed in her brain like a pounding sound. Ray moved carefully, feeling the increasing intensity of each action. As the woman gasped for breath in growing pain, she fought merely to survive. In that moment, her body moved like a machine, but her mind was slipping into a deep void. Knowing that everything had an end, her hope of survival slowly weakened. Ray continued to increase the pain, stretching out each moment of her agony. Her arms and legs were chained and fixed to the table. Ray, with a spark in his eyes, began to inspect the old tools. Each one would turn into a blow on her body. After a while, the woman's body didn't just feel pain. She also began to feel the tension in every muscle. Each movement brought the fear of death one step closer. This was hell, a hell where everything existed solely to inflict pain. Ray thought her suffering would consume her soul. He had delved so deeply that he now saw pain as a game. The tears flowing from the woman's eyes fed into Ray's very essence. As he prepared the next torture, the fear in the woman's eyes grew with every passing minute. The woman tried to escape into the dark corners of her mind, but there, in the darkness, Ray was present, like a hell that penetrated deeper with each step. At every moment she felt the silent approach of death, but this was not a relief for her. It only meant a deeper fear. Death was no longer just her enemy, it had become her greatest terror. The woman couldn't develop any defense against Ray's tools. While her mind slammed against the walls, her body was dragged into a new pain with every movement. Ray's hands, sinking into her soul, made each moment even more defined, carving out the dark path that led to the beginning of the torture. The woman kept resisting just to survive, but Ray's tortures left traces of a nightmare drawing ever closer with each passing second. And everything continued to be crafted like an art on her body. That art fused pain and fear, slowly destroying her with every minute. In the deep darkness of the night, for a moment, it felt as though time had stopped. The only sound in the house was the woman's heavy breathing, echoing like some terrible rhythm. That moment, when everything was violently cut off, caused the storm inside her to intensify even more. As Ray watched the woman tremble in pain, as her soul slowly melted with each step, he fell silent for a brief moment. That silence was more terrifying than death itself, because the terror inside the woman was so immense that Ray's cold smile deepened the fear hidden behind that silence. With each passing minute, the woman seemed to disappear like a ghost. The chains, the sounds of the metal pressing against her skin, all the pain, slowly surrounded her like the shadow of a ghost. She was so exhausted that every movement of her body numbed her for a moment. But no matter how numb she felt, her mind was always preparing for an awakening. That silence had already consumed her soul. It felt as though everything was preparing for one final explosion, and in that moment, what seemed like the end of everything would become a new beginning for her. Ray's gaze was cold and calculating. There was no emotion in it. In that moment, as he watched her body, he wasn't just taking her pain. He was playing a game built on each movement, each breath. When a moment of emptiness appeared in the woman's mind, there was something like the shadow of death in that emptiness. It was so silent that the fear inside her descended deeper with every second. The woman tried to close her eyes, but in each moment she felt the embodiment of her fear in Ray's gaze. "Now, everything is silent," Ray said, breaking the silence with his voice. His voice was cold and deep, like the calm before a storm. The woman felt she was in a much worse situation than a fish at the river's edge, waiting to be bait. With every step Ray took, the fear growing inside her intensified. In that moment, the woman felt something awaken within her. There was no chance of finding salvation. Everything had come to an end, but even death had not yet come as close as this. Crushed under the weight of chains, cables, and metal, the woman searched for a glimmer of hope. But at that moment, she realized that nothing could change. No help would come. No screams would be heard. Everything had already disappeared within that moment. Now all she could do was try to survive. But while she fought the pains that gripped her body, her mind was constantly searching for a solution. But there was no solution. Neither by screaming nor by shouting could she awaken from this nightmare. As Ray observed her resistance, his smile sharpened with each passing second. The woman, searching for an escape route in her mind, tried to suppress a scream trapped within her, but the sound only turned into a sob. The hopelessness on her face slowly disappeared, replaced by an empty void. That void had consumed her identity. Ray, pleased by this void, took a step forward. His silence for a while had only fueled the woman's desire to scream, but neither her screams nor any rebellion could save her from this dark world. With one last hope, the woman tried to imagine that something might change deep within her, but in that silence, every thought lost in the corners of her mind had become even more intertwined with her death. Searching for hope only dragged her deeper into the ruins. Like the moment when the fish waited by the river's edge, she now understood that she had to wait. Waiting meant deepening further in time. In that moment, Ray's cruel gaze reminded her that she was in a much worse situation than a fish waiting to be baited at the river's edge. A soul lost in that pain was being dragged toward helplessness, and that dragging, it seemed, would only accelerate. Ray's smile slowly spread like a ghost as he watched the woman's lost hopes. Her eyes were filling with a deep emptiness, disappearing more into the darkness with each passing second. That night was as terrifying as the calm before a storm, because it was a silence in which she knew that with every moment, she was being dragged further into the hell inside her. She was now trapped between fear, silence, and pain. This would be her end. But for Ray, it was only the beginning. At David Parker Ray's house, everything had seemed like a game at first. It was so ordinary, so insidiously approaching, that the woman hadn't even begun to think of it as a trap. But now, with every passing minute, the sounds echoing off the walls of this house were amplifying the dimensions of the terror inside her. At first, it was only Ray's dark glances and cold demeanor that had caught her attention. But now, everything had become much more horrific. The woman began to slowly realize Ray's plan. That game was seeping into her consciousness, and her fear was turning into a spiral. Echoes of sounds she had never heard before reverberated off the walls inside. The cold clang of metal, the screech of chains, and the echoes of Ray's steps turned into a buzzing that intensified every fearful thought in her mind. These sounds started to envelop her mind, turning every thought into a labyrinth of fear. What had initially been a fog of awareness was now morphing into a terror, a nightmare that took shape with every step. It was clear now that everything had a purpose. Ray's goal was to conquer her soul, body, and mind. At first, he had only used physical pain as a weapon, but now he was beginning to invade her mind. With each passing minute, Ray's intentions became clearer. This house had become her nightmare. She now realized that behind everything there was a plan. He wasn't just trying to suffocate her with pain, but to penetrate the deepest corners of her soul, to completely annihilate her physically and mentally. As she felt this fear on one side, she also watched Ray move with cold-blooded precision. That house was like a prison. There was no escape. Every corner, every room was filled with traps. These traps were unseen but always observed. Every movement, every breath was part of a trap. It was such a dark and tangled place that each thought lost in her mind led her deeper into another snare. Once a woman who had owned her freedom, she was now surrounded by chains and walls, condemned to spend every moment between these traps. The woman began to slowly unravel Ray's dark plan. Ray was setting a new trap at every moment. But these traps didn't only target her physical body, they were also a mental game. Ray's cool and calculated demeanor clouded her mind, and she was constantly faced with another dead end. In that moment, she realized that in Ray's eyes, everything was proceeding according to plan. Every movement, every word was creating a void in her mental world. While she fought the pain in her body, the woman also tried to understand Ray's games inside his mind, but she realized it was already too late. That house was like a tomb she wandered like a ghost. Each piece of her bound by chains kept her more trapped inside, and taking one more step meant slipping further away. The house continuously trapped her into a corner, and the traps grew more complex. The more Ray saw the hopelessness in her eyes, the deeper his smile became. In those moments, the woman only felt the pain, but at the same time, she searched for escape routes in her mind. But each escape route led to another trap. Each time it felt like she was taking one more step backward. Ray's intelligence squeezed her tighter with every step, shaping every thought into a new snare. As the woman grew weaker with each passing second of physical pain, something began to change inside her mind. Fear, panic, hopelessness. These emotions danced in her thoughts. But no matter how much she tried to resist, each trap, each plan, drew her deeper in. When she found herself in a dead end, she realized that the end was near, but in Ray's eyes there was only one thing: power. The power in his every movement darkened the last flicker of hope inside her. All escape routes in her mind had vanished. With each step, she slipped further into the abyss. With every thought, she was dragged deeper into another snare. Ray had stopped affecting her body. Now, he was trying to rule her soul, her mind, her very thoughts. In that moment, she realized that freedom had been nothing but a dream, and with every passing minute, that freedom slipped further away. She was trapped in Ray's house. Every wall was a trap, every corner filled with fear. Falling into the trap was her only choice. But with every trap, she was drawn a little further inside, losing a little more. Ray was making every moment a more calculated step to destroy all the hope left within her. With each step, he was erasing every trace of her former self. Once a hopeful woman, she was now nothing more than a piece of a nightmare. Falling into a trap wasn't just about accepting an inevitable end. It was the acceptance of becoming nothing. One night, as the woman's eyes slowly opened, the world momentarily erased itself. There was a deep silence, but it was a silence that, for an instant, foretold a storm waiting to break. As her eyes focused on a dark room, she realized something was shifting inside her. Her mind, like an awakening, was slowly pulling itself free from the claws of years of fear. She was no longer a woman lost in the silence of the past. Like a snake born from pain, she was transforming the agony inside her into sharp fury. The power within her, the survival instinct that had been suppressed for years but never erased, was slowly surfacing. For the first time, she felt that something inside her hadn't been lost. For so long, every move, every breath had been under Ray's watchful eye, and she had never experienced a sense of power that belonged solely to her. But now, the determination to find a way to survive was rushing through her veins with every beat of her heart. The pain in her body was still there, each wound, each chain, every strike. But the resolve in her mind had become so powerful that nothing could stop it anymore. Ray had always been cold-blooded. That house, under his control, had become his domain. The woman had come to understand that Ray's fearlessness would push him to take another step further in his torturous games. But now, even though Ray's plans to control her body had moved forward, the woman had unearthed something from the depths of her hatred and fury. The spirit that once writhed in fear was now driven by a new purpose: survival at any cost. The change in her eyes reflected back at Ray as a threat. For the first time there was unease in his cold, sharp gaze. The power within her began to spread through her body. No matter what, she would escape this nightmare. But as she came to terms with the cost of escape, a cold fear spread in her chest. That house, a prison ruled by Ray, was like a tomb. And now the exit would only open with a sacrifice. To survive in that house, to undo Ray's plans, one life would have to be given. The woman accepted this truth in a single breath. A life would be the price for freedom. And in that moment, the last sliver of hope inside her rose over the deaths of others. When Ray noticed the woman's resistance, his smile faltered for the first time. Rather than losing control, he took one more step to annihilate her completely. His fearlessness kept him dancing with death at every moment, but the change in her eyes told him that his plan was on the verge of breaking. The woman now faced a choice between fear and survival. But this time, survival would come with a price. Ray saw only determination and a thirst for revenge in her eyes. She was no longer just a victim. She had transformed into a monster seeking her vengeance. And this transformation posed a massive threat against Ray's fearlessness. The woman no longer feared him. Instead, she watched every one of his movements with careful attention. As Ray planned to break her weakness, to take full control of her body and soul, opposing her will was no longer an easy task. Finally, in the dark of the night, everything seemed to freeze for a moment. The woman made her final move to defend herself. Shaking with pain but trying to unleash the terrible strength growing inside her. Ray noticed that the woman's movements were no longer controlled. The power within her had become a massive obstacle to him. As she continued to bend and break under the weight of her pain, the resolve inside her gave her the ultimate strength. However, no matter how strong her final move was, it would face a harsh reality. The woman had survived Ray's fearlessness, but the price of escape was so costly that she would have to pay with a part of her soul. Every movement, every step, left a loss within her. That loss was something she would never get back. As Ray was overwhelmed by the woman's final resistance, in a brief moment of emptiness, he realized that she was now attempting to reach for freedom. But the one who would pay the price was none other than Ray himself. The woman had finally created her last chance for escape. But this chance was both her freedom and Ray's death. As the woman passed by Ray's body, she knew that everything had come to an end. But this death wasn't the end for her. It was a beginning. The price to leave Ray's house had been paid, but now she had won her freedom.